This is a story about the greatest comeback in music history. In 1983, the singer Anna Mae Bullock was playing a show at the Ritz in New York. Years before, Anna, or Anne as her friends called her, had been a big star. But now she was seen as a nostalgia act. She played hotels, Vegas cabarets, conventions. She was in her early 40s, divorced, deep in debt. She hadn't had a hit song in a decade. She had no record deal and no record labels that were even interested in her. But what she did have was an ambitious young manager, still the best voice in rock and roll, and a lot of determination. She was determined to become a bigger star than she'd ever been. Then the next year, in 1984, she had the biggest album of her career. A massive record that would eventually sell over 12 million copies worldwide. A lot can change in a year. Anne was born in Brownsville, Tennessee on November 26, 1939. Her early years were hard. She had learning disabilities, so she had a difficult time in school. Then her family broke apart, and Anne often felt unloved, but she found solace in singing. She would sing and dance every chance she could get. For her family, in church, at picnics. She said singing was both a form of expression and a source of comfort to her. But she didn't dream she would have a career in singing. Anne wanted to be a nurse, but a fateful meeting changed the course of her life. Anne had been living with her grandparents, but after her grandmother died when she was a teenager, she relocated to St. Louis to live with her mother and sister. One night in 1957, her older sister Aline took her out to a club in East St. Louis, where the hottest band in town played regularly. They were a band called the Kings of Rhythm, and they were led by a 25-year-old guitar player named Isaiah Turner. Isaiah was already an important figure in music history at this point. His song Rocket 88 had been a hit in 1951 and one of the earliest songs in a new genre that would become called rock and roll. When Anne first saw Isaiah on stage, she thought he was old, skinny, and ugly, and he already had a reputation as a dangerous man with a bad temper. But she was absolutely mesmerized by the music. Kings of Rhythm shows were raucous affairs where sometimes audience members would get a hold of the microphone and sing with the band. Anne became intent on getting that opportunity. One night somebody put the mic in her sister Aline's face and Aline refused. Anne saw that as her chance. She grabbed the mic and started belting out a rendition of B.B. King's You Know I Love You. She said, "I started singing, my voice cutting through the noise and the smoke, forcing everyone to take another look at little Anne." After that, Anne and Isaiah became friends, and she joined the band. Anne actually started dating another member of the band, Raymond Hill, and at 18 years old, she had a baby with him. But Raymond left, and eventually Anne found herself with Isaiah. By 1960, she was pregnant with his child. But also in 1960, Anne had her first hit song. It was a song Isaiah had written for another artist. It was called A Fool in Love. But at the last minute, that singer dropped out, and Anne came in as a last-minute replacement. Isaiah actually intended on having the vocals re-recorded later, but when a copy of the record found its way to a record executive named Henry Juggy Murray, Juggy insisted that the song would be a hit with Little Anne's vocals. And he was right. Juggy put A Fool in Love out on his Sue Records label in July of 1960, and the song went to number 2 on the R&B charts before crossing over to the top 40 on the pop charts. An 8-month pregnant Anne made her TV debut on American Bandstand that October. But of course, she didn't debut as Anna Mae Bullock. Isaiah decided that she needed a stage name. He gave her the first name Tina because it rhymed with Sheena, as in Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. And he gave her his own last name, Turner, even though they weren't married yet. Anna Mae Bullock didn't find out that her new name was Tina Turner until she saw it printed on the record.
You got me smiling when I should be ashamed. Got me laughing when my heart is in pain. Oh, now I be a fool. So I'll do anything you want me to do to tell me how to just you. You know you're in love.
Isaiah, of course, was better known by his nickname, Ike. And when he saw that Tina was going to be a star, he transformed his Kings of Rhythm into the Ike and Tina Turner Revue. Ike and Tina continued to have hits through the 1960s and early 70s. Classics like the Phil Spector-produced River Deep, Mountain High, and of course their 1971 cover of Creedence Clearwater Revival's Proud Mary.
Big wheel keep on turning, Proud Mary keep on burning, rolling, rolling, rolling on the river.
Proud Mary became a top 5 hit and won the duo a Grammy. Tina could also write too. She penned the hit single Nutbush City Limits about the small town in Tennessee where she had grown up.
Nutbush City Limits. Nutbush City Limits. 25 up speed limit.
But what the world didn't know at the time was that behind all the success, Tina was being brutally abused by Ike.
Who settles an argument if you...
Well, there you see. Things are not always the way they look, you know.
No.
Now, I always
just
do the
noticed
talking.
that Ike's kind of quiet.
Yeah, Ike is very bashful when the lights are on.
She would later say that life with him was torture. She had made a promise to him when they first got together that she would stay by his side, and he kept her with him through physical abuse and psychological manipulation. Even the name he had given her was his way of showing her that he owned her. He even trademarked the name, and she would later have to sue him to get the rights to continue performing as Tina Turner. Tina finally revealed all of this in an interview with People magazine in 1981. She said with Ike, she had been living a life of death. She said, "I didn't exist, but I survived. And when I walked out, I walked, and I didn't look back." By the mid-1970s, Ike was addicted to cocaine, which made his abuse even worse, and Tina finally got out. She left him in July 1976, and their divorce was finalized in 1978. But Tina found that she couldn't really escape Ike Turner. He continued to harass and threaten her for years. Tina was convinced he was going to hire a hitman to kill her, and she kept a loaded gun in her purse at all times. But also the shadow of their creative partnership continued to hang over her. Everywhere she went, people asked her about Ike. Where's Ike? Could she really make it without him? She did have a couple of solo albums, but none of them were successful. Her 1979 album Love Explosion was released in Europe and failed to chart, so it was never even released in the US, and it caused Tina to be dropped by her record label. Broke and desperate, Tina took any gig that she could get. She played hotel ballrooms and small clubs, trotting out the old hits and trying to stay relevant by doing disco covers. She would do TV appearances on shows like Hollywood Squares and the Brady Bunch Hour variety show.
Tina Turner plays the block one way.
Ike and Tina. Where's Ike?
It allowed her to keep working, but it wasn't where she saw herself. But it was on one of these TV appearances on an ABC special called Hollywood Nights that she met an Australian man named Roger Davies. Davies worked for a talent agent named Lee Kramer, and one of their acts, Olivia Newton-John, was also on the special. Tina met with Lee and Roger and told them that she needed management. She said that Roger Davies was quiet, but he asked the right questions. He asked Tina, "What do you want?" And Tina told him honestly, "I want to be a rock star. I want to be playing huge stadiums like Rod Stewart and the Rolling Stones. That's where I belong." A few weeks later, Roger went to see Tina play at the Venetian Room at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. She was playing 2 shows a night there. Roger watched the first show and was unimpressed. The crowd sat there eating dinner, and Tina's show looked like a washed-up cabaret act. But he stayed for the second later show, and this time he saw Tina come alive. The crowd was looser and wilder, and Tina controlled the stage like an absolute star. After that performance, now Tina had someone else that believed in her. Roger Davies became Tina's manager and was determined to get her a record deal. He replaced her band members and made the show into the raw rock and roll show that Tina wanted. No more Vegas hotels. He booked her at cool clubs like the Ritz in New York. Roger had been laying the foundation for her comeback, but it was at that Ritz show in 1983 where things really started to happen. There were still a ton of musicians out there that respected Tina, including some really big stars. And on the day of that show at the Ritz, David Bowie happened to be in New York. He had just re-signed a new deal with Capitol Records, and that night the executives from Capitol wanted to take him out to dinner. But Bowie told them no. He said, "I can't because tonight I'm going to see my favorite singer perform, Tina Turner." This intrigued the executives at Capitol, and so a bunch of them went with David Bowie to see that show. Everybody was blown away by Tina's performance, and now, after years of not having a record deal, Capitol Records wanted to sign her. There was one Capitol A&R executive in particular who was convinced that Tina would be a star again. His name was John Carter. Carter had been blown away by Tina's live show, but there were also a few other signs that a comeback could happen. In 1981, Rod Stewart had invited Tina on stage with him during a performance on Saturday Night Live that had been really well received. And then in 1982, Tina had collaborated with this project called the British Electric Foundation. They were a synth-pop group from England featuring Martin Ware and Ian Marsh from The Human League and Heaven 17. They were working on this album called Music of Quality and Distinction Volume 1, which was going to be 80s synth covers of classic 60s and 70s songs. They had wanted to work with James Brown on a cover of the Temptations song Ball of Confusion, but James Brown dropped out at the last minute, and again, Tina seized the opportunity. At first, she was a little confused going into the studio with Ware and Marsh because there was no band in there. It was just computers and synthesizers. But she imbued the song with the power and emotion that only Tina Turner could.
Well, the only person talking about loving thy brother is the preacher.
Their cover of Ball and Confusion was the first track on the album, and it actually became a hit in Norway. So based on all this, John Carter from Capitol signed her to a record deal. He got some flack from some of the other people at Capitol at the time, but just like Roger Davies, John believed in Tina. But then the whole thing almost fell apart before it happened. There was a regime change at Capitol and new management came in. John Carter got a call from Roger Davies, who told him, "The new head of Capitol just called me and told me that Tina is being dropped." John went into his office furious. Now, I should say here, there was a person who became the new president of Capitol Records in 1982 named Don Zimmerman. Fun fact, he was the uncle of Motley Crue's Nikki Sixx. But Don Zimmerman recalled that when he became the president of Capitol Records and he saw that John Carter had signed Tina Turner, he said, "Have you lost your mind?" Now, John Carter, even though he never specified Don Zimmerman by name, he tells the story very differently. He said he flipped out, he went into this unnamed executive's office and said, "Hey, that was my act." And this person said, "Carter, you signed this old N-word douchebag?" This was indicative of the racism and ageism that Tina Turner was facing. Ike Turner had told her when they got divorced that she was too old and she was never going to have a career again. So John Carter says he literally gets on his knees and begs this executive, who again he never names, and he says, "You've got to call Roger Davies back and tell him that you're not dropping Tina Turner." And finally the executive relents. He says, "Okay, fine, we're not going to drop her, but we're not going to do anything to promote this album. We're going to put it out and that's it." John Carter and Don Zimmerman have both since passed away. And meanwhile, Roger Davies is over in England looking for songs for Tina's new album. First, Tina worked with Martin Ware and Ian Marsh again on a cover of Al Green's Let's Stay Together. This song was actually released as a single in late 1983 and became a hit, which helped get Capitol to commit to a full album. They got a song from Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits called Private Dancer. It was a song about a prostitute, but Tina saw the universal message in it. She said, "I think most of us have been in situations where we had to sell ourselves one way or another." Private Dancer would become the title track of the album. Then Roger found a song that he was convinced would be a smash. It was written by a duo, Graham Lyle and Terry Britton, and they had tried to give it to a number of other artists, but everybody had turned it down. Finally, this British group called Bucks Fizz, who had won Eurovision in 1981, agreed to record the song. But Roger really wanted it for Tina, although when Tina heard the demo, she hated it. She said the song was too poppy. She was the queen of rock and roll. She didn't want to record this wimpy song. But Roger told her to sing it in her style, to really make it her own. That song was called What's Love Got to Do With It?
Oh, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion?
The album Private Dancer was released May 29th, 1984. The single What's Love Got to Do With It was also released that month and would go on to become a #1 hit. Tina was 44 when this song topped the charts, making her the oldest female solo act at the time to have a #1 song. It charted higher than any song that she had done with Ike. It was the first and only #1 hit of her career. The album Private Dancer went to #3 on the US charts and stayed in the top 10 for 39 weeks. In the UK, it went to #2 and stayed on the charts for 150 weeks. The album sold millions and millions of copies and won Tina 4 Grammys.
What's love got to do with it?
What's love got to do with it? Tina Turner, Danny Producer.
I'd like to take this award
give it to someone that's been wonderful to me as a friend and in business and in many ways. My manager, Roger Davis. It's been wonderful in here.
Many people have called it pop music's greatest comeback, but Tina herself said she didn't consider it a comeback because she said before that moment, Tina Turner had never arrived.
You must try to